And welcome to 23 Degrees Sideways. We're going to talk a little bit more about whether or not humans were genetically designed to live past 30. Obviously, the answer is duh. But there are people who believe this. And to touch back on the ideological aspects of this one more time, there are a lot of people who really think that the pre-agricultural human was someone who was searching for grains and searching for fruits, and that was their primary thing, and they ate meat when they had to because nothing else was available. It's really more or less the opposite. There's a very heavy bias towards hunting. And in fact, we have been using fire to cook meat for at least 1 million years at this point, based on the archaeological record. You know, if you're religious about that, then you need to put that into your time frame, however it works. We know that we've been using fire, and we know that we've been using fire to cook for a very long time. Evolutionary long time. Like, we have literally evolved ourselves to eat barbecue. Barbecue is the best thing for you. It's kind of crazy, but there you go. Now, life expectancy. One of the things about barbecue is that, again, to touch back on something from a previous video, there's a mobility theory. Okay, there's a hypothesis that mobility had to be high, and that you see a lack of what we perceive as 50, 60-year-old bones in the few finds we have of Pleistocene human fossils, archaic human fossils, because mobility was very high and people just got left behind and eaten by predators, and it was like we literally were herds of cattle and had no actual, like, tribal bonds or family bonds or anything. Which is also ridiculous because there's plenty of evidence that a core part of what makes humans different, what differentiated us moving forward in evolutionary terms, is actually fatherhood, the concept of a family, the concept of a family working together. So we'll get to that too. And again, if you've ever bred dogs, you can see the difference. All right, you can see the difference. But there's a reason why dogs have litters, or wolves, as opposed to single individual babies. We'll get into that a little bit as well. Also, so let's do statistics really quick. Let's just do the basic statistics, okay? In general, people talk about the average lifespan of humans in pre-agricultural times being around 30. Completely bogus, completely wrong, and we're not going to talk about averages a whole lot, but there's three different definitions to averages. Then there's means and modes. And I'm just going to break this down for people who don't have a lot of statistical background, but something like 43-ish% of your population, we think, died before the age of 15. Most of those, okay, the vast majority die before the age of 3 or 5, depends on which model you're using. Basically, infant mortality is ridiculously high in these populations. If the baby doesn't come out right, the baby dies. And there's a lot of stuff into that. There's a lot to unpack into that, and a lot of it is there's spiritual, ethical, moral, there's also what presuppositions am I using and people like me when we talk about this, but we know that if you made it to the age of 15 through whatever hazards there were, your odds of living to be over the age of 50 were really, really high. Okay? Yes, there's that whole 15 to 25, 28. There's a period in there, and we kind of arbitrarily put some of these numbers together. 15 is a semi-arbitrary number. If you made it to somewhere in that age range between 13 and 18, then the odds are that you're going to have a pretty decent life. And if you make it into that, there's a young adulthood, which has always been a more dangerous time to be an adult than later adulthood. And this is actually this has to do with human society interactions, the hunting, the way people hunt, the way humans develop socially, and testosterone levels. But that 18 to mid-20s range, you have a significant adult death rate. Like there's a little hump and then it flattens out for a long period, and then in the 50s it starts to climb, and it just does a slow climb until by the time you're hitting 80s, 90s, like everyone's dead. It's very rare to see any evidence moving later into better records, better findings, better bones. It's very rare to find people that we can identify by any model as being in their 80s or 90s when they died. Not impossible, and once again, the bone modeling that we're using is kind of, and the dental wear, kind of dodgy because it's based on some presuppositions that are not necessarily accurate. Okay, we're always basing this off of post-agriculture man, and that's not necessarily a really good benchmark. So mortality rates are really high really early, and then they flatten out, and then they're high again, and then they flatten out, and then you've got the early adulthood hump where people are just risk takers. Teenage boys are teenage boys, and it's not necessarily a cultural thing that does that. There's a significant set of biological factors that go into that, different hormone levels, and it very, very much there's a biological basis to that. More risk taking, which is functionally very useful because these are the people who are also your primary means of defense for or advancement, expansion for a social grouping. Okay, and then it flattens out again, and then it starts to go up in middle age, And we're dealing with a situation where, yes, we're going to start looking at 50, 55 as middle age. We're not really considering 65 to be middle-aged yet. That's definitely moving into elderly. We still haven't actually extended the idea of middle age that far. It's just that middle age became 28 to 32 with the advent of the first industrial revolution, the agricultural revolution, where we industrialized human labor and dehumanized it. So, all in all, if you made it to adulthood, your design life expectancy was in your 60s. Okay? The human body is really designed to do that. We're very mobile, we're very healthy. If you look at people who are operating as designed, then you look at people in their 60s and they're doing just fine. They're probably doing more than you can as a postmodern human today. People, you'll get totally baked on a 1.5 mile run and gun course, right? Shooting, light obstacles, running. Totally fry me, right? I have actual health issues, but it's probably going to fry you too. And it's not going to be just a morning exercise of a couple of guys showing off to each other for the girls before breakfast. We're really looking at a level of health where, yes, 1.5 miles of obstacle course and throwing spears, or, we're not talking about shooting guns, or arrows with some somersaults and crazy stuff, is before breakfast. kind of like, hey, yeah, it's a good start to the day. Look what I did. Now let's go. Worlds of difference in health and activity levels, and that's also worlds of difference in health and activity levels when you're 60. So there's this model that says that, or hypothesis, they've used modeling to determine that no one could have lived very long past 30 because you could, or 35, sometimes 40. 40 is probably the more common number in modern ideological research, because you couldn't keep up. And I don't know where this comes from, because when you look at these societies, the high mobility is not really what you're looking for. What you're looking for is successful hunting in quantities that allows a tribe to sit itself into basically a secure perimeter, hang out, eat, tell stories, do their stuff, because there is a social component to this all the way back, all right? Obviously, there's some point past 1 million years ago where you don't have that social component in the same way, but we have evidence of very specifically human social behaviors going back really far, and the idea that it must be primitive and not important is just bogus. Totally bogus, all right? I think that primitive man was probably a lot more modern than people tend to give them credit for. And that includes a lot of the researchers. So a lot of my opinions on this come out of various levels of research. I did do some college coursework on this. I didn't do as much as I would have if the world had been a slightly different place. Right now, the recreationist, the experiential-based anthropology and archaeology is a big deal. When I was originally in college, right before I joined the Navy, so back in the 80s, it was considered absolutely retarded. I'm sorry if I used that word wrong. I'm from the 80s. It was considered really bad to try to make a spear and throw a spear and assume that meant that you knew anything about spears. You had to study fossilized remains, and then you knew something about spears. Well, we've come to this point now where we are taking the findings, we're making stuff, where you have people who are doing living archaeology, and it's a different world. And I probably would have gone right through, all the way through, and gone all the way into research if that had been acceptable at the time. But I was quite literally put down and received a lot of negative input for the idea that making this stuff and using this stuff had any relevance at all. Now, I point this out because I think that it's important to know that that presuppositions based on not only non-experience but going against experience are suspect. At the very least, they're highly suspect. You know, we don't. There are a lot of things we don't know. There are a lot of things we can't know. But if we look at humans, if we look at archaic humans as humans, we can develop a slightly different picture. And for Liberty Doll, because this whole series of videos is for Liberty Doll, or inspired by Liberty Doll, I got way off into the weeds there as far as the science goes. But yes, there's a pretty good chance that we can extend the human lifespan dramatically, because it looks like prior to agriculture, our functional, healthy lifespan was actually longer than most people have now. So, everyone stay sideways, have a great morning, and I'll see you soon.